Welcome everyone to the Westchester Institute. For those who are not here from the membership meeting, we're going to have a little art exhibit, an interview with Dr. Joe Russo, who, among being the faculty member at the Institute, is also the director of the Westport Recovery Center, and had a recent art show in Chelsea in the fall called The Dark Side of Nature. Now, certainly that's a theme that has made some people wonder, what is that about? But we can easily look around our world and see a lot of evidence of the dark side of human nature, the dark side of nature itself. Certainly Freud and Jung both were drawn to art as therapists. They analyzed art, and we're just going to start with a brief background that brought you into this realm of the darkness of art and the human condition, way before becoming a psychiatrist.
Very true. Thanks, Rob. I would say that I've been an artist my whole life. Since I could remember my earliest memories, I was drawing and painting, and I remember at 3 years old, I grew up in the Bronx, New York, and I remember just sitting at the coffee table and drawing pictures, and my parents would give me endless pieces of paper to just draw and draw and draw, and I would paint, and I always loved that part of school. First grade, whenever we had a project, we had to do a diorama and build something, I was completely excited. So I was always building things and building models, and then I felt dissatisfied that the models did not have enough details, so a lot of times I'd start to build my own models, and was always very intrigued with trying to capture an experience that I had or something that happened, a memory, and kind of getting a snapshot of it. An instance would be, sometimes I would go to movies and I'd be fixated on a certain movie. When I was a young kid, I loved the movie Jaws. And I just loved all the images and the shark, and I got really excited about it. So I drew like almost every frame of the movie, the shark hitting the cage underwater and all these different things, and I represented over and over and over. Also very fascinated with horror films as well, and love to really try to capture the scenery of different movies, specifically a lot of the old black and white gothic horror films, the old Frankenstein films. One of my pieces is actually trying to capture that. This one back here behind Rob, it's called Isolation. And someone recently asked me about that, how did you get the idea for it? And I didn't realize that it actually goes back to childhood. When you see the trees, they're kind of just like stilt-like structures, and that stuck in my mind from the Bride of Frankenstein, James Whale movie, where there's a scene where the monster's running through the woods, and you have these stilt-like poles, and if you look, the camera shot actually shows that it's just a pole, and there's no branches on it, it's cut off at the top. So it's a stage set, and I was always very intrigued with that. So, you know, I did art my whole life, and then up into probably around the age of 19, I was at a real crossroads. Well, actually, no. In high school, I had an art teacher who kept saying, why aren't you going to art school? Why don't you go to Pratt or Parsons? But I was very torn because I also very much like science. I thought as a little kid, I had my doctor kit also, and I decided then I was going to be a doctor, and really loved human anatomy and the science, and that whole part too I liked. So I guess I went for the safer route at that time and decided I was going to be pre-med, thinking that I would still do my artwork on the side. And I was okay with that because I felt the art was mine, and I didn't necessarily feel I needed to get formal training in it. I could continue to do it. I loved it. It was my passion. And I could also study something else. So I was pre-med. And at that time, like I said, it was a crossroads around 19. I had a trauma in my life. My mom passed away, and I wasn't quite sure at that point where I wanted to go. So I had dropped out of school at that time, and I explored a lot of different avenues. I did acting for a couple of years in Manhattan. I also did singing. I was doing my artwork, and then I wound up coming full circle and going to NYU. And I said, okay, let me continue the acting on the side, do my artwork, and be in school. I originally started studying psychology and reading about it to help my acting. I figured I could learn more about developing a character, the psychology behind the character, what the motivation is, and it took me away. I loved it so much. I was so interested in it, and I started studying psychology and decided to major in it. Now, again, I wasn't sure, do I want to become a clinical psychologist? do I want to go to medical school? So I said, well, I'll go to medical school and maybe I'll do psychiatry. So I went to medical school, and I knew, I had the idea in mind that if I did psychiatry, it'd be a good way for me to also have a private practice and then return to the art and also be able to do that on the side. For many years, even though I didn't have much time to do my artwork, I did it at times, interestingly, of maybe you would say convalescence. If I was sick, I wasn't feeling well, and I had a lot of time on my hands, I'd be able to sit home and I'd be able to work on it some more. But then it kind of took a backseat for a while, and I started working in Westport at a psychiatric hospital called Holbrook Behavioral Health Services in 2003. And I met a social worker there who is an artist herself. She's a photographer, and she wanted me to bring my work in and show her. So I showed her the sculptures, because some of these sculptures go back to high school, actually, one of them. And she loved them, and she said, you really need to get them in shows, because I just had them collecting dust in my house, really. I wasn't showing the work. I never really thought of showing the work. And I started putting them in some of the local galleries in Westport, in Greenwich, Kent, Connecticut, and in Rye, New York. And eventually, I decided to throw my own show in Manhattan, and I had one in 2008 in Tribeca, and then another one just this past fall, September, in Chelsea. So right now, I'm still, I think, struggling with being able to balance doing the artwork and also practicing psychiatry, because I really feel they are very two different processes. When you're trying to manage a practice, you're more in, I guess, left brain analytical mode. And then to just switch into artist mode and get lost in it, I mean, I feel the creative process is something that's very different. It's very loose, it's very free. You really need to feel inspired. You can't just sit down now and say, okay, now I'm going to do artwork, like you're going to do the bills. So there are days that I'm off. My practice is only 3 days a week. I work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, with the hope of, on a Monday and Tuesday, trying to do as much artwork as I can, but I find I'm getting a lot of calls on a Monday, I'm constantly getting interrupted. So it's hard. It's hard to just snap back into creative mode and then go back to working with patients. But I'm trying, and I know I need to, because it really feels like it'll give balance in my life.
I was just thinking of art as a therapy itself, and if you could speak about the therapeutic value of making art, as well as the creative impulse, especially since we have a number of therapists at our institute who have been art therapists or are art therapists as well as psychoanalysts, and use art in their treatment. Certainly it may be something more therapeutic just for yourself, but it's also an expression of something that can't be put into words, maybe at least not initially.
Absolutely.
And if that's something that
I don't employ it in my practice, which is interesting, and I ask myself why I don't. And I think it's something I guess I've held on to, that it's for me in a way, and it's very therapeutic for me. But yes, I think there's great value in being able to, for people to have a vehicle to really access their feelings, their emotions, their inner states, without articulating it necessarily in a verbal way. I guess I've suggested, I've had patients who have creative drives and talents, and I've strongly suggested to them that they need to pursue it. And I had one man who is a businessman on Wall Street who was really feeling very disillusioned and unhappy with the life that he's leading as a businessman, who had creative ability. And I really pushed it, and it helped him, and he's found a lot more balance in his life now.
wow.
So I guess in that way maybe I have, but formally, I guess, practicing art therapy as a discipline, I haven't.
No, that's actually a fairly new discipline that came out of psychoanalysis by an analyst who was also an artist but found a way to use it as a technique.
Right.